Okay, you notice that I don't have any long introduction as to what I do, so that's a good reason, because I don't like to spend much time on it, but I do want to let you know what I do a little bit so that you understand the context of where I'm coming from. It's a nice slide, isn't it? Yeah, it's cute. What do you think those are? Huh? The toys, absolutely, good for you. So that's what I do for a living. Okay, so I was a teacher and then I became a pediatrician. I was a teacher for 10 years and then I went to med school at 31, and I've been a pediatrician all these years. And along the way, I was trained as a fellow in pediatric infectious diseases, and I was an AIDS physician for probably 20 plus years. And my primary work at that point was really as a scientist, dealing with all of the incredibly intricate and beautiful and magical aspects of the discovery of treatment and cure, in essence, for a chronic and manageable disease. And so then what happened was I got interested in the world outside of the United States. And that came from the fact that during my time on this planet Earth, we became not just a sort of local, chauvinistic, single country world, even though that's really how the that's American society in a nutshell. We then discovered that really we are a global world. We are all connected and we all need one another, and that interdependence is what came alive during my years as a physician, and that really probably was because of HIV. So there are many good things that come, not only the science of HIV and what it led to, but there are really great things that come from how we see things, our perspective, because we begin to listen to people and their different perspectives around the world. And so we are, in essence, all connected. We are Pangea, and the tectonic plates are moving incrementally in a small amount of time, and we still are and will always be very connected as it comes around in a circle. And why I start with this for you is because my world then became the world across the ocean. But really wasn't that I was leaving this world here in the United States of America. It was that I learned a lot of lessons. I was a good student and I learned about what you do to find out about what people need. What do they need? They need the same things that we need here. And what children needed was children needed to be cared for in a very precious and treasured way. And for HIV especially, which really was at the beginning of my travels abroad, was that children needed to not get HIV. So we needed to prevent HIV, then we needed to diagnose it in those who had it, and then we needed to treat it. Test and treatment, prevention, test and treatment. And that was a beautiful process that came about. And then from that, I ended up in the developing world doing lots of work that came from understanding the needs. And both Paul and Dean discussed over and over again. I always like to be at the third base because it's nice to listen to such smart people who, give you a scaffold and a framework for thinking about the sustainability and the scale of programs and the process of providing such wonderful and giving and loving service to people around the world. So what finally happened for me was, and what I want to talk to you about, is that I took all the wonderful learning that occurred for me in the United States, in inner cities and communities that were impoverished, and then I took that abroad and tried to figure out by needs assessments what would be needed for children who were affected by HIV. Either they lost their parents, their grandparents, or they became HIV positive. Then they required not only care for their HIV infection, but they required, most importantly, care for their mental health issues. That is likely the most important thing we can ever do in the world for anyone else. It's a really important thing that we recognize that the most dear and most important way that we finally have hope and grow and have potential in life and can do good things for ourselves and our families, be independent in our thinking and solid in our living skills, is that we have good mental health, that we care about ourselves and our family, that we take good care of ourselves, and that our behavioral health long term is good. And if you're poor, that is the first thing that is ruined for your life. Poverty, really, getting shelter and food, that's not really, that's just on the surface. The real things that matter are really about how you feel about yourself. And do you wake up in the morning blue? Or do you wake up in the morning feeling pretty good and hopeful for the day? And if you're poor, you can't really keep that going consistently. So we concentrate at Worldwide Orphans Foundation, which is the organization that I'm the CEO of. We concentrate on the psychosocial aspects of children's lives by integrating them always back into the community, even if they have been abandoned and they've lost their community. We try to keep them in the community. That is our goal. We have a fancy mission, to transform the lives of orphans and vulnerable children through art and music and theater and dance and sport so they can be healthy, independent citizens in their own community. It's poetic, right? But really, what is it? The theory of change for us, which I speak to today, the theory of change is really how to take children, look at them, and understand how they think and feel. That's where the basis of the theory of change for what we finally do for programming. So we've done a lot of different things, and both Paul and Dean could comment a lot about all the lovely and beautiful programs that we've designed over the years. And they're all good. As Dean mentioned, don't let anyone ever tell you that just because you didn't have a sustainable program or scale your program that you did anything wrong. People who make judgments, well, that's really a hard moment for me. I don't care much for that. And I think you ought to know that making judgments is usually not all that helpful. So all the good that you'll do after being here today, I consider it very worthwhile, whatever it is, and all the people you affect, they feel it's worthwhile as well. But finally, there's a process. And everyone who understands global aid work knows that that process may start off with just a nice idea, something that you do to help someone have clean water, shelter, food, education, and then further enrichment, which involves music and dance and art and theater and improv and sport. Because that's really who we are as human beings. We're about being creative. Without creativity, we are not human beings. Every one of us in this room has beautiful elements of art inside of us and creativity that will bring happiness to our own personal lives as well as to our family and will bring goodness to society. So this program is called Element of Play. And we did that already. So the power of play. There's a lot of organizations around the world that use play. Right to Play, Johan Kast, the great Olympic speed skater. There are endless organizations that are all about looking at the work of childhood, which is about play. Curiosity and innovation and discovery and unended, open-ended interaction and socialization among children, which leads to the discovery of wonderful things to do together and share and building teams and being happy and connected. We all understand play, but we forget it. You in this room, I want to remind, you should be playing. That's the first thing that I want to make a statement about. You should all be players. There should be every day something you do that's playful. And the reason I state that is because the theory of change for WWO around play is that we believe that the secret to the success of children around the world is for adults, caregivers, family members, societal figures, community leaders, all of them need to understand how children think and feel so that we wouldn't impose the saddest and most horrific, most tragic aspects of children's lives in the developing world, which includes the long list that we must say at this time, where children are not protected because they're not understood. And what happens to them? They can become homeless or live in the streets or child soldiers. Or they can be put to work in the early years of childhood. Or they can be prostituted and trafficked. or they can be sexually abused. All of you need to read the literature on adverse children's experiences. These are studies that were done through Kaiser Permanente and the Centers for Disease Control, 95 to 97. 17,000 questionnaires went to members of Kaiser Permanente. People answered the questions, and now we have huge amounts of data that then fill 50 scholarly studies, papers, published. Go to ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies. And the reason why I bring it up is because we now really understand that we live in a world of trauma and stress toxicity. And maybe that's okay for adults, but it's not okay for children, because what happens to children when they're exposed to trauma and stress toxicity is that they are genetically rearranged. All of you should look at epigenetics. That's a really important aspect of science today. Epigenetics, which really speaks to the issue. It was mentioned in my genetics textbook in medical school in 1982. It was actually in one of the chapters. I have Reut's immunology and genetics. And now it's everything. And it refers to the change in DNA that can occur from trauma and stress toxicity. And it's powerful in all of our lives. And for those of us who've sustained any trauma in our lives, we are rearranged. And that rearrangement of us then leads to a shape of who we are that was not really destined, that was created by elements beyond our control. And it wasn't an element of play, it was an element of punishment, where the people involved in that process were not thoughtful and didn't understand that children are to be treasured and that they are precious, and that every one of us in this room must understand how children think and feel. And even if you have children or you've studied children, you don't know really how they think and feel, because it's extremely complicated and very scientific. And it must be taught. And what are the things that must be taught? The things that must be taught are: how do children recognize fear? What do children do when they are afraid? When do children recognize the difference between them and someone in a mirror that's them? When do children understand that harm will come their way? When do children understand the sweetness of attachment and closeness? And what do they do when they don't have attachment and closeness? What happens to children who are not loved and cared for and respected and cannot attach to an adult individual that then leads them to not be able to self-regulate and self-soothe and self-calm and be able to handle the stresses that are normal to life? Normal stresses. Not talking about tragedy, where we have to look at data that shows that 20% of children under 5 in the United States have been sexually abused. If that's not a tragedy, I don't know what is. But because 4.8 billion of us on the planet of 7 billion don't understand how children think and feel, we then can't protect them. We're in denial, and we don't understand how to help children navigate a very special world that involves curiosity and discovery and innovation. And so, toy library. Well, what is toy library? Well, in Scandinavia, people over the last hundreds of years have been very aware of disabilities. They're very incredibly thoughtful about children who are born with underlying medical conditions like cerebral palsy, who cannot navigate a physical environment and may be obviously very affected emotionally, and then are frequently abandoned in situations where there are no resources. And why wouldn't they be? Why wouldn't someone take a boulder and crush a baby's head in Hawaii or other ancient cultures when the baby was found to be deformed? Because there were limited resources, and this is what people did. People didn't understand. They acted from the reflex of what was best for the community. And as horrible as it may sound to you, this is how we still react and respond, even though we don't have that kind of world anymore. So, when a child is born with a disability, the best thing for that child is for the parents to understand the nature of the disability. Head on, understand what cleft lip and palate means, what CP means, what an underlying genetic disorder may mean. It likely has nothing to do with the child's intellect. It's likely just a physical deformity, which requires adaptive environmental changes and not cruel treatment. And so the toy library was born in Scandinavia to help parents understand those disabilities, and it was actually a takeout library with toys that were primary colored and that were set in place for gross motor, fine motor, personal social adaptive, expressive and receptive language, and cognitive, all of the domains of development. There was the focus of these toys and their ability to help parents understand the needs of their children. And I found the toy library in St. Petersburg in Russia in the 90s. And I fell in love with it immediately at an early intervention institute, and I still know the people who run it. And those toys were used to help parents understand the disabilities that were then quantified and studied in the institute, and further they ended up being used for some trainings in orphanages in St. Petersburg. And I stole it. And now we have 23 toy libraries in Bulgaria, in Vietnam, in Haiti. And we just opened our first American toy library in Orange, New Jersey, which is a deindustrialized city that was part of the tract of land in 1666 with Newark and on the other oranges, and then became the hat center of the world. Its nickname is Hat City. And then it was destroyed by racism and the road 280 in the 60s. And now it's coming back in this most magnificent way of urban development. And we have many cities and examples of this. Right here in New Haven, we have deindustrialization and the alteration of a normal, sort of comfortable societal connection among people because of racism. And so this city we focus on is because we wanted to really examine the metrics and the monitoring and evaluation that are so important for programs, which both Dean and Paul alluded to in their work. And so the toy library, or element of play, consists of the toy library, music and motion, so kids can dance and understand the power of movement on thinking, storytelling to practice language and interaction and communication, sport, nothing better than sport for the soul. And finally, improv and acting and the discovery of your own imagination. All of that is element of play. And that is what we use and what we hope will change the theory of change, that if we instruct adults, so we're training adults in all of our countries. The toy libraries are for children ostensibly, but they're really secret weapons with adults. We focus on the adults and we try to help them to understand that there's a very important place for play and it is essential for children. And now what we want to do is scale all of these toy libraries. We want to have a center of excellence in Orange, and then we want to scale and sustain them in the community because they fit really beautifully. They fit with community schools. They fit with Head Start. They fit so that people can feel good in the community to be able to work together to make the community strong. So how do you scale that? Well, that's a big question, and that's why I was here to join the panel, because scaling things is probably the most abysmal part of global aid work. I have many other programs that I've not been able to scale, whether it's a school in Addis Ababa or attachment therapy programs and granny programs in Bulgaria, programs for disabilities, family resource centers, lots of things that work and have served people well and deeply, but are by dollars extremely expensive. and maybe not as sustainable as they should be, and maybe not as scalable, although some of those, like family resource centers, are scalable. But this particular program, Toy Library, is extremely scalable. What will require would be different business model, if you will, where we then come into a community, we assess the needs of the community, like I did in Philadelphia last week. I went into an area of Philly where there's a village arts and humanities program that's 30 years of age. They have murals, they have 15 art parks, they have all kinds of outreach in the community through the arts. Buildings are painted, there are murals, it's amazing. Toy Library would be perfect there for the community. So I'm in there with them figuring out how can we set this up and how do we finance it. Well, it'll be through community dollars, public dollars and private dollars. That's called a public-private partnership. I'm sure you all know about that, right? And what that involves is corporate dollars. And so we've now embarked on a new pathway, if you will, for us, and that is the fantasy of corporate social responsibility, which it really is. It's such a fantasy, CSR. It's sort of come and gone 100 times in my time doing global aid work. But it should be real. And it's not real because it's about profit and not really about social responsibility. I'm not a cynic. It's just a fact. So what we want to do, though, is establish ways in which to partner with organizations and communities so that we can scale the toy libraries all over the country and thereby training adults to get engaged. This is the last part of my chat, and the most important is that we want adults who have been disenfranchised, who don't have resumes and CVs, and don't have degrees. We want to incorporate them as we did in other countries and hire them. Elderly women who we hired in Bulgaria, middle-aged women and men who we hired in Vietnam, youth who we hired in Haiti to do our toy libraries, and then veterans and foster youth and kids dropping out of school. They will be our toy librarians, and they will be trained with transferable skills. That's an old concept after World War II, where people actually learned how to do things that then ended up going to another step, which is nothing to do with the job you had to begin with. So you could become a toy librarian, but learn how to design a program, implement a program, communicate, and manage a program, and step out the door after doing toy library for a year or two, and you could run a business. Run a factory, because you have all the pieces that are important to build capacity and have a business and manage. And so that's what we want to teach. And we want people to be credentialed. We want all the toy librarians that we train to get certificates. We're now in the process of doing trainings all over the state of New Jersey through what's called Professional Impact New Jersey, where we are certified as master trainers, and we can train teachers in early childhood development and strengthen their ability to teach content, but also not be so completely oppressed by behavioral challenges. That's the problem in education all over the United States, that we're constantly challenged with behavioral issues. Rather than being able to be creative and redirect and distract and really understand children, we're always in this position of discussing disciplining children. I'm done.